The Bridge Runner. Norah Westfall crouched at the edge of the canyon, her palms pressed against the red sandstone as she peered into the depths below. The wind carried the scent of juniper and dust up from the valley floor, 300 feet down. She'd been running these mesas for 12 years, but this particular crossing still made her stomach clench. The package strapped to her back weighed maybe 2 pounds, but it might as well have been a millstone. Inside was a vial of synthesized antivenom, the only dose within 1,000 miles, and it needed to reach the Morrison Ranch before nightfall. Their youngest boy had been struck by a coral snake 6 hours ago. The medical helicopter sat grounded at the same Flagstaff clinic where she'd picked up the antivenom, its crew watching the wall of dust and debris that stretched across the northern horizon. The storm was moving southeast, the same direction she needed to go. Which left Norah. She stood and adjusted the hydration pack on her shoulders. The GPS tracker clipped to her belt showed 17 miles to the ranch, but the direct route meant crossing 3 canyons and navigating terrain that would challenge a mountain goat. The safer path along the highway stretched 32 miles and would take too long. Behind her, she could hear the helicopter pilot on his radio, reporting 0 visibility and waiting for conditions to improve. Even if the storm passed in an hour, the aircraft would still need time for post-storm inspections and clearance to fly. The boy would be dead by then. Norah pulled her wide-brimmed hat lower and started down the switchbacking trail that descended into Red Rock Canyon. The air tasted of dust and electricity, and she could see the brown wall of the storm in her peripheral vision, maybe 20 miles to the northwest and moving her direction. She'd be running ahead of it, but not by much. Her legs moved in the rhythm she'd perfected over thousands of miles, a controlled fall that used gravity and momentum to eat up distance while preserving energy. The pack bounced against her spine with each step, reminding her of its precious cargo. She'd started running deliveries when she was 19, fresh out of high school and desperate to escape the suffocating predictability of Phoenix. The job had seemed romantic then, carrying medicine and supplies to remote ranches and mining operations scattered across the desert. Most deliveries went by truck or ATV, but sometimes you needed someone who could travel where vehicles couldn't go. The canyon walls rose around her as she descended, their layered rock telling stories of ancient seas and forgotten epochs. Norah had learned to read these formations during her first year on the job, when she'd gotten lost trying to reach a copper mine after a cave-in. The geologist who'd eventually found her had spent 3 days teaching her basic navigation and geology while they waited for rescue. "Rock doesn't lie," he'd told her. "Learn to read it and you'll never be lost." She'd taken that lesson to heart. Over the years, she'd become something of a student of the landscape, learning which plants indicated water, how wind patterns carved the mesas, where flash floods had scoured new channels through the stone. The desert had tried to kill her more than once, but it had also taught her to survive. The trail bottomed out at a narrow creek that ran year-round, fed by springs hidden in the canyon walls. Norah paused to refill her water bottles and check the time. 2 hours since she'd left the clinic in Flagstaff. The boy had maybe 4 hours left before the venom overwhelmed his system. When she looked back toward the canyon rim, she could see the leading edge of the dust storm beginning to obscure the distant mesas. The air was getting thicker, carrying the metallic taste of an approaching haboob. She splashed across the creek and began the brutal climb up the opposite wall. This was the hardest part of the crossing, a nearly vertical scramble over loose rock and through thorny vegetation. Her hands found holds in the stone while her feet searched for purchase on narrow ledges. The pack threw off her balance, forcing her to move more cautiously than she preferred. 3/4 of the way up, she heard a sharp crack from her belt. The GPS tracker had struck a jutting rock during a particularly awkward maneuver, its plastic case split open and screen flickering before going dark. Norah cursed under her breath. She was committed now, too far to turn back, but still had the most challenging terrain ahead of her. She paused on a narrow ledge to catch her breath and pulled out her backup, a waterproof topographic map folded to show this section of canyon country. Old habits from her early years on the job. She oriented herself using the compass built into her watch, confirming her position relative to the distinctive red sandstone formation that marked the approach to the third canyon. The ranch sat in a valley where 3 dry washes converged, clearly marked on the map but still requiring careful navigation to reach. Halfway up, she disturbed a rattlesnake coiled in the shade of a boulder. The snake's tail buzzed a warning, but it didn't strike. Norah froze, breathing slowly while she calculated her options. Moving backward would be more dangerous than going forward. She waited until the snake settled, then carefully stepped around it, giving the creature a wide berth. "Thanks for the courtesy," she whispered, and continued climbing. The mesa top stretched before her like a moonscape, red stone carved into fantastic shapes by wind and water. Without GPS convenience, Norah had to rely on map and compass navigation, occasionally pausing to check her bearings against distinctive rock formations. She ran between towering hoodoos and across slick rock domes, following game trails and her own hard-won knowledge of the terrain. The traditional navigation methods were slower but more reliable, no batteries to die, no signals to lose. But today her mind stayed focused on the package. She'd never lost a delivery, not in 12 years. She'd broken bones, survived lightning strikes, and once spent 3 days pinned under a fallen tree, but every package had reached its destination. It was a matter of pride, but also something deeper. People depended on her. They trusted her to bridge the gap between their isolated lives and the outside world. The second canyon appeared ahead, its rim marked by a line of ancient cottonwoods. Norah descended more quickly here, using a series of natural steps in the rock face. The trees provided blessed shade, and she could hear water running somewhere below. This crossing would be easier, a small stream and a gentler climb on the far side. As she ran through the cottonwood grove, she startled a family of deer who'd been drinking at the stream. They bounded away with white tails flashing, crashing through the underbrush in their panic. Norah smiled despite her urgency. She'd always loved the moment when she encountered wildlife, those brief connections with creatures who belonged to this landscape in ways she never would. The stream crossing was knee-deep and bitterly cold. Norah gasped as the water hit her legs, but she pushed through quickly. Halfway across, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The water was noticeably higher than when she'd crossed this creek on previous runs. The distant storm must be dumping rain upstream, sending runoff down through the canyon system. She quickened her pace, splashing through the deepening current. Flash floods in canyon country could turn a gentle creek into a deadly torrent in minutes. She'd seen the aftermath. Boulders the size of cars moved like pebbles, entire groves of cottonwood stripped bare. Her boots squelched with each step as she scrambled up the opposite bank, water still rising behind her. The third canyon was the trickiest, and without GPS, it became genuinely challenging. The walls were too steep for a direct descent, forcing her to follow a circuitous route that added precious minutes to her time. She jogged along the rim, searching for the break in the rock face that would give her access to the canyon floor, second-guessing herself twice before finding the familiar chimney formation. The sun was getting lower, but more concerning was the wall of dust she could see approaching from the northwest. The storm was maybe an hour behind her now, turning the sky an ominous brown-orange. She needed to be across open ground before it caught up. Finally, she found the narrow chimney that led down into the canyon. It was barely wide enough for her body, and she had to remove the pack and lower it ahead of her on a rope. The descent was more like caving than climbing, squeezing through gaps in the rock and feeling her way down in near darkness. The canyon floor was a different world. Massive boulders blocked the path, forcing her to climb over and around obstacles the size of houses. In some places, she had to crawl through spaces barely larger than her body. The pack snagged on rocks and thorny brush, requiring constant adjustments. But she made progress. Step by step, obstacle by obstacle, she pushed forward. The boy's face appeared in her mind. She'd never seen him, but she imagined him pale and struggling, his family gathered around his bed. The antivenom in her pack might be his only chance. The final climb out of the canyon was a nightmare of loose rock and crumbling ledges. Norah's legs burned with fatigue, and her water was running low. She'd been running for nearly 5 hours, covering terrain that would challenge a fresh hiker. But she could see the ranch buildings in the distance, maybe 3 miles away across rolling grassland. She emerged from the canyon as the sun touched the horizon, but the natural twilight was deepened by the approaching dust storm. The last stretch was almost anticlimactic, a gentle run across open country with a clear view of her destination, though she could feel the first wisps of dust-laden wind at her back. The ranch house grew larger with each step, and she could see vehicles parked in the yard. An ambulance sat beside the house, its crew waiting for her arrival. Behind her, the storm was perhaps 30 minutes away, a towering wall of debris that would make travel impossible for anything above ground level. Norah sprinted the final 100 yards, her legs finding reserve she didn't know she possessed. She reached the porch as the ranch door opened, revealing a cluster of worried faces. The boy's mother stepped forward, her eyes red from crying. "Is that," she began. Norah nodded, unable to speak. She slipped the pack from her shoulders and handed over the insulated container that held the antivenom. The paramedics moved quickly, checking the vial and preparing their equipment. "How long?" one of them asked. 7 hours, Norah managed. "The venom peaked around 6 hours ago. He should respond well to treatment." The mother grabbed Norah's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my boy." Norah squeezed the woman's hand but didn't reply. She was already thinking about the return journey, the long drive back to Flagstaff in the ranch truck that would take her home. Tomorrow there would be another delivery, another race against time across the unforgiving landscape she'd learned to call home. But tonight, a boy would live. That was enough. She walked to the edge of the porch and looked back at the canyon country she'd just crossed. The last light painted the mesas in shades of purple and gold, and she could see the dark line of the canyons cutting through the stone. It was beautiful and terrible country, the kind of place that tested everything you thought you knew about yourself. The boy's father approached, offering her a glass of water. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you run through country like that?" Norah accepted the water gratefully. "You learn to read the landscape," she said. "Rock doesn't lie. Water always flows downhill. Wildlife knows the safe paths. The desert teaches you, if you're willing to listen. And if you're not?" She smiled grimly. "Then it kills you." The ambulance departed with the boy and his mother, racing toward Flagstaff ahead of the storm that was now visible as a brown wall on the horizon. The antivenom would counteract the coral snake's neurotoxin, and within hours he'd be sitting up in bed, asking for hamburgers and video games. It was a story that would be told around dinner tables for years to come, the day the bridge runner saved young Billy Morrison's life. Norah didn't think of herself as a hero. She was just someone who'd learned to move through difficult country, carrying things that needed to be carried. The desert had taught her that survival wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being persistent, adaptable, and respectful of the forces that surrounded you. As she settled into the passenger seat of the ranch truck for the drive back to town, she thought about the narrow chimney in the third canyon, the rattlesnake on the cliff face, the cold stream that had shocked her system. Each challenge had required a different response, a different way of thinking about the problem. Even the dust storm behind them was just another element to work with, something that grounded aircraft but couldn't stop someone willing to run ahead of it across difficult ground. That's what made the job interesting. Every delivery was a puzzle to be solved, a route to be discovered, a conversation between human determination and natural law. She'd found her calling in the spaces between civilization and wilderness, carrying hope across the empty places where hope was needed most. The truck's headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness as they drove toward town. Norah closed her eyes and let the familiar rhythm of the road lull her toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring another package, another destination, another chance to prove that some things were worth the risk of crossing impossible country. Behind them, the canyon country settled into night, its ancient stone keeping watch over the desert and all the small human dramas that played out in its shadow. The bridge runner had done her job, and the wilderness had let her pass. Until next time, when she would ask permission once again to cross the spaces that separated one life from another.